and welcome to this week's episode of Book Bites. And I am thrilled to be joined today by Joanne Tracey. Hi, Jo. Nice of you to join us today from Queensland, I believe.
It is Queensland Sunshine Coast. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Sandy.
Is it nice and warm up there? It's getting a bit cold down here in Sydney.
You know what? We're getting into that part of the year that the advertising slogans are about. The beautiful one day, perfect the next. And out of that disgusting humidity that we've had for the last forever.
Oh, excellent. I might have to book a trip, I think. We are here today to talk about cozy mysteries or cozy crimes, or cozies as they're actually generally named. But before we do that, I'm just going to pop up the details for the giveaway. So for those of you who are either watching live now or if you're watching this back later, if you leave a comment or ask a question, you will go into the draw to win a copy of Jo's latest book, One for Sorrow, a Clementine Carter mystery. And we're going to be talking about this book as well as cozies in general today. We've just got a couple of hellos to start with. Yvonne saying hi, nice to see you, Yvonne. And Bev is here. Nice to see you, Bev. And Yvonne is up on the Northern Rivers and it's a little bit cold up there too. Yes. So we're hitting that weather now, aren't we? Which, as you said, it's nice not to have the humidity, isn't it? So, and Jo's here as well. Joanne, nice to see you too. We've got two Jo's here today, which is lovely. So, as we said, we're going to be talking about cozies today. And for those people who might be watching this that don't know what cozy means, Jo, can you shed some light? What is a cozy?
Essentially, it's a crime story without the gore. So that is the easiest way to describe it. Any of the violence that happens or any of the actual deaths, and it's usually a murder at the heart of it, they happen off stage. So we don't see it. We tend not to come into it until either after it's happened or generally after it's happened. And quite often there'll be a bumbling amateur detective with different stages of bumbling. Some are very good, some are very bumbling, some are very comic, some are very... All the different tropes that apply in most of the other genres can also apply in cozy. So that's the general rule, that there is usually a murder, it happens off screen, and at the end, all the loose ends are tied up and the bad guys get caught and get their just desserts.
So we know we're in for a happy end. Well, maybe not happy ending, but a satisfied ending at least.
We know that. And that's where the comfort part of it comes into it. So we know what we're getting into when we get into a cozy. We know that the ends are going to be tied up, that good will prevail over evil at the end of the day. So... Yeah.
And for those of you like me who don't do gore very well, it's a nice alternative to some of those grittier crime novels that, I don't cope with that sort of stuff too well.
No, I don't either. And I can't even watch it on television. So, and the thing with a cozy is you don't really have to shut your eyes at any of the different parts, whether you're watching it or not. It's also... cozies are enjoyed pretty much from everybody from school-age kids through to, your grandmother or your great-grandmother or whatever. So it tends to be a little gentler, I suppose, on some of the language and on some of the other scenes. So we're definitely looking more at the G/PG sort of rating than anything else.
Yeah, excellent. Yvonne is actually reading a cozy right now, The Cryptic Clue, which would be Amanda Hanson's cozy. So, yes, they're good fun cozies. Now, they have been around forever, cozies. It's not a new term by any stretch of the imagination. And Agatha Christie is often cited as like the mother of the cozies with her Miss Marple and that kind of story. But in recent times, there seems to have been quite a huge resurgence in the popularity of cozies. They've always been there, but they're really popular at the moment. Do you have any insight as to why that might be, Jo?
They are. They're massive at the moment. Obviously, Richard Osman is probably one of the biggest of the big, really. And they've been on telly for so long anyways. We've got all the, the Father Brown, the Midsummer Murders, even some of the Veras. So all those British crime procedurals, quite often they're cozies, Agatha Raisin. We've got them all. But I sort of think it's the resurgence in it at the moment is partly due to, and this is my own humble opinion, Brexit, some of the things that are happening in the world, the pandemic, all of those things where real life was just a little bit too real at times. And cozies give us that escapism, but it's an escape into something that's, yes, we're using our brain and we're solving a mystery along with our detective, who is an amateur sleuth. They're not some hardened 20-year police force person. It's an amateur sleuth that they're working their own way through it, and with a cozy, we're going along with that. But we know at the end of the day we're going to win. So there's that certain outcome that we don't have with a lot of other life. And I don't know about you, but with the stuff that's happening in the news, it's just nice to go off to an English village, have a bit of bunting and some tea and scones, and maybe a side serve of murder in there. So
Tea scones murder, nice.
absolutely.
Helen has also joined us. Hi, Helen. Nice to see you again back at Cook Bites. Yeah, I think it's the name, isn't it? Cozy.
I'm sorry, Sandy, I missed that.
Yeah, something's gone wrong with the sound here. I said it's in the name, cozy. So it's comfortable, isn't it?
It is. It is comfortable. It is. It's the type of thing that you want to curl up with when things get too much. It's comfortable. It's slippers and a glass of red wine and a fire and a book. Comfortable.
There are some common threads in a lot of the cozies out there. I'm not going to say all of them, but quite common. And one of those is setting within a cozy, and often they are set in small towns. In your instance, with One for Sorrow, it is set in a place called Whale Bay, which is up around where you live, a fictional town, I might add, quiet seaside town. What is it about small towns, do you think, lend themselves to cozies?
I think it's the connection that you have in the community in a small town. So you've got a wealth of characters that you can choose from. You've got not just the setting, which in Whale Bay's case is a combination of, I guess, Harvey Bay and Mooloolaba, with a few other places all thrown in together. So that was my inspiration for that place. But it's smaller than both of those places, really. But in those towns, you've got your bakers, you've got your coffee makers, you've got your coppers, you've got your shopkeepers, you've got all the elements where you've got a set of characters that will take you from one mystery to another. Because that's the other thing with a cozy. Generally speaking, we're following that one detective and her sidekicks or his sidekicks through a number of different stories and a number of different scenarios. So we need those quirky side characters and the quirky sidekicks to give us our subplots along the way as well. So a small town really lets us get in and get to know those people and get to know the population. Whereas, and I've read some great ones that have been set in cities as well, but they can be a little grittier and they can be a little more distant. Because and when you do set in a city, the best ones will do it in a neighbourhood or an enclave or I think the Karina Chapman ones, Kerry Greenwood's Karina Chapman's, for example, and her Phryne Fishers. Now, they're obviously set in Melbourne, but in the case of Karina, they're set all around this one little set of shops that she's put in. I think it's down in Flinders Lane somewhere. And all the different shopkeepers in there. You know, we've got an art historian and a professor. We've got a witch. We've got Karina, who's a baker. So, you know, the suburban ones do work, but they need to have that small town setting within the larger area. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I always find it interesting when we look at these settings of these small towns or these, small parts of towns. And I think like of Home and Away, for example, which I know is not a cozy, but it's the best example I can think of where an awful lot can happen in a really small town, right?
You've only got to look at Midsummer. Hello, you would not move there.
You would not live there for kids, would you?
Absolutely not. I hate to think what the death toll is these days, but it's got to do something bad to the house prices. But it's funny, like when I was creating Philly Barker, now Philly is a middle-aged antique dealer, so she works in a barn, like a conglomerate of other antique dealers. We've got your military guys and people who sell fashion and a cafe, but the town itself is super small. There's a pub, there's a church, there's a few little houses and not very much else. but a lot of the action takes place in that enclave of the barn, of the antique dealer's barn, but also the tiny little villages that dot around that same area. So, but when I first brought her in, that's what I wanted for her. I wanted to be able to have a number of different settings I could use that was still the one setting, or to have Philly go somewhere else to solve the mystery. I mean, people just fall dead around her. I think it's going to be the way that it goes towards the end. But it's also an invented place. It's not going to do anything bad to the house prices. So.
Yeah, Yvonne was also thinking of Midsummer when we were talking about how much can happen in a small town, and she's always liked that series. So. And Joanne has said that she loves your Philly Barker books. Now, Philly Barker is another cozy series that you've read, and I will have some graphics from those books towards the end of our chat today. And they are set, correct me if I'm wrong, in Yorkshire, is that right?
Yorkshire, yeah, a little town called Chipple, a village called Chipple in Yorkshire.
So with that being there, why did you decide to set the Clementine stories here in Australia?
It's a completely different feel. And it's interesting actually when you're writing it. So I'm writing a third Philly at the moment. Now, Philly is, I guess, more like the weather there. So it's a little more overcast, it's a little quieter, it's a little, well, and the subject is antiques as well. So my characters are a little older in Philly. But Whale Bay, when I first envisaged Whale Bay, I had the idea of Clementine, who's a jaded lawyer from Melbourne. She grew up in Whale Bay and really hasn't been back since. But the picture of Whale Bay I had in my head was those hazy summer, you know, when we get the photos, the old photos that we used to take in the 80s, where they've got that almost orangey, yellowy, hazy feel to them. That's how I felt about Whale Bay. And so it's brighter, it's lighter, and generally speaking, the characters are a little younger there as well. And there are a great more range of characters. So they're two very different series, and not so much light and dark, but I guess, yeah, it sort of is light and dark, and in a way. So you've got Australia, which is lighter and brighter than Yorkshire, which is absolutely God's country as well, but it's definitely not light and bright. So
yeah. It's interesting how setting can change the feeling of a book, isn't it?
It certainly is, yeah. And in my case, I think that was really quite deliberate too. So.
Now, you mentioned Clementine and that she's a lawyer and she returns to Whale Bay. I think it's 25 years since she was last there, and she goes there because her aunt has passed away and left her house. So she heads back there. And as you mentioned a little bit earlier in the chat, this is another one of these commonalities in cozies, that there's an amateur sleuth in them. Where did Clementine come from?
Oh, Clementine's an interesting one. Clementine actually came from a discussion. I've written a bit of astrology in my time as well. I used to write a lot of astrology. And I had this sort of idea for a series of books that was loosely linked by zodiac signs without actually being an astrology series of books.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a girlfriend of mine up in Hervey Bay, and she kept saying to me, you really need to write this, you really need to write these, you really need to write these. But Clementine wasn't really in my head at that point. I just had an idea. And this friend and I actually had a bit of a brainstorming day too. And one thing you need to know about me is I do not plot. So when we had this brainstorming day, we sort of did on butcher paper some ideas of who Clementine could be, who her friends could be, what could happen. We came back and I lost the butcher paper, but then I sort of,
no.
It was just one of those things. Even if I'd had it, I probably wouldn't have, I didn't know who did it myself until 3 chapters before the end. So that's just how it goes. But Clementine came from that original discussion. And in this case, Aunt Rose, who is the aunt who died, she has a new age shop. So she does astro and tarot and all of those things. And she's got that lovely little new age shop. And Clementine knew a bit of that when she was younger. So she's come back, and there's a little bit of a feel of that through it, but it's not the main thing. And whilst I've kept the themes of, yes, it's loosely linked, it's really loosely linked, as in this case, Clementine's an Aries, and that's where it stops. In the next one, it'll be loosely linked to Taurus, and Taurus is an earth sign, so it's about the earth, and that's where we stop. So it's a very, very loose link. But yeah, Clementine was another one, though. When she turned up fully formed. So I knew how she looked, I knew how she dressed. She just turned up fully formed.
That's a magic moment for writers, when that character turns up fully formed, and people who aren't writers don't quite understand what that means, and we sound a little bit perhaps we should be locked up, but it happens. Yeah.
And it's great when it does. Like this particular one, I was supposed to be writing something else when I wrote Clementine. I was supposed to be writing actually the book that will be this year's Christmas book, which is more women's fiction. And I'd started writing it, and I just wasn't getting it just wasn't there. But Clementine was there. And I think it was only about 7 weeks before the deadline, I had to get it into the structural editor. I started, and it just came. It was one of those really, really amazing situations that doesn't happen very often at all. It happened with the first Philly Barker. It happened with this one, where I was at work. I was managing a project to move an office, so I was also doing a second job at the same time in my job as well. So I was really, really busy at work, but she just wouldn't go away. So it almost wrote itself, really.
That's fantastic. I love it when they won't leave us alone. It's a nice moment for writers. Now, you mentioned that often the amateur sleuth has a bunch of friends that help them in their amateur sleuthing, and you definitely have that here in 1/4 Sorrow. There's a lovely cast of supporting characters there. I wanted to ask you, why is it that you think these amateur sleuths can find ways into the puzzle, let's call it a puzzle, the mystery, that the police can't? Because they are all amateurs. They're not trained in this. They're not investigators. How is it that they can find some of the answers that a policeman probably can't?
Well, this is probably not a very good politically correct answer and all the rest of it, but I think it's partly because they're not stifled by process or...
Yep. No, I don't think there's anything wrong with that comment.
Yeah, so they can come at it from a completely clean slate, and they can come at it also from a point of instinct, which I think, the best investigators would always have great instincts, and they follow it, and then they find the evidence to fit that instinct or whatever else. But for the amateur sleuths, they can come at it from a position of pure instinct or pure gut feeling, or putting things together that might not otherwise be there, and they don't really have to worry about process. But I think it also does work that, because we always do have an element in most cozies, there's an element of police involvement there, and you absolutely need that. In the case of Whale Bay, or in the case of Clementine, she's got an old-time country copper that's there that she's known since she was a kid. In the case of Philly Barker, her sidekick is a retired detective inspector. So he gives her the process, and he gives her the, some of that structure that she needs, but she can still go off and join the dots on the basis that she wants to do that, or the basis that she wants to follow those clues.
Yeah, there's a bit more freedom, isn't there, with how they can interact with other people as well.
Yeah. I mean, and you can go into different extents with it. Agatha Raisin, I think those ones they're fabulous, because you've got the comic element as well to that. And there's quite often a comic element to a lot of the cozies, but it's not to the extent that you have to have a joke, a page, or anything like that. You can bring it in through your sidekicks, and you can bring it in through some of the situations that your investigator can find herself in.
Yvonne has a different take on it. She says that there are sticky beaks.
And that's another thing that the small towns are good for, the twitching curtains.
So what I'm gathering from this is my mother would make an excellent amateur sleuth. That's what I'm taking away, because holy, she knows everybody's business, that one.
She might have missed her calling.
She might have. And I did grow up in a small town, so yeah, it would have been perfect for her.
Oh dear.
Stacey has joined us. Hi, Stacey. Nice to see you, and she'll watch the rest back later. That's fine, Stacey. Um, there is also a dash of romance in One for Sorrow with cafe owner Finn, who's a little bit delicious. And he was good friends with Aunt Rose when she was alive. Were you always planning there to be a romantic element in this story, or did that grow as you wrote the story?
That one, that one grew. The original idea was not to give her a romantic interest in the first book, but she seemed to have other ideas. Um, so that one did sort of grow a little, and obviously, over the series, we've got a little bit of ups and downs with those. That will happen, which will have to happen if they're going to sustain anything for the next few series. In Philly Barker, there's no romance yet, but at the moment it's a friendship. It might grow into something more. It might not. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think they know yet either. So,
Right.
and that's another thing. Like when you start talking like that about the way that you write, people will be like, anyone who doesn't write is, oh my God, it's like you're talking to your invisible friends. But they
We
tend to know what they want to do.
Yeah, we like to think we're in control, but we're not. Yeah, the characters are usually in control, and no, I've had that many times where I thought we were going over here, and then they go, no, actually we're going over here.
Yeah, and I think the harder that you push against it, the more blocks you come across.
Yeah, you've got to let them tell their story essentially.
Mm-hmm. Essentially, yeah.
Helen says she loves the indirect and subtle humour that comes through in Cozies. Yeah. And I think it's also a relatable type of humour. We all know people that may say or do or behave in those ways of these characters.
I think so, and you can bring out some of the quirks in some of the characters, and I love that. I've got a cast in the second Philly Barker book where it's a group of oldies that are out on a stakeout in a pub, and you can sort of imagine it happening. You can imagine them all sitting there working out what it is that they're going to do, and you can really imagine it happening. And there's another series, Julia Chapman's Dale's Detective Agencies. She uses humour brilliantly in hers. And again, it's through those side characters rather than your main protagonists. It's in those side characters that the quirks come through.
Yeah, for me it was Maggie, and correct me if I pronounce this wrong because the spelling is quite unique. Does she say Susie? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Susie.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like exactly, Susie and Susie, but one's spelt with an O-U-X, like in Susie and the Banshees. But
yeah, they were quite a nice little double act, those two together. I appreciated that relationship. Halfway through, I had in my mind who I thought had done it. And that's part of the fun, I think, in these sorts of stories. We're trying to puzzle it out as we're reading it. Was it this person? Was it that person? Etc. And I think you may have mentioned this already, that I know some crime writers who do not know who did it until they get to the very end of the book. Were you the same with this one?
Absolutely. I had no idea. And then the person that I thought it was, I got to about 3 or 4 chapters from the end, and I thought, actually, it can't be them because I need them for the next book. So it can't be them. It's got to be somebody else. And it was actually quite a funny story because I was actually finishing up on my day job. So my day job was in Sydney. So I'd gone back to Sydney to finish up for work. And a few people saying, "Oh, what are you going to do?" And I said, I'm going to write full time. And how do you think that's going to go? And well, as a matter of fact, I'm not sure because I've just worked out that the person I thought did it didn't do it, and I've got this book in 2 weeks' time. So it was just one of those situations. And the senior project manager I was talking to, he's just gone completely straight-faced at me, and he goes, "You have just ruined every single book that I will ever read again for me. You're telling me you did not know how this was going to work?" I didn't. He said, well, I'm sorry, but that's just ruined everything for me.
Oh no.
And he was deadly serious. He really thought that every single author in the world had this plan. And I had to sort of explain that there's a spectrum between plotters and pantsers, and we're all somewhere in that space, and we will be somewhere further along in each of the books that we write. But there's never a one size fits all.
No. And I think it was Michael Robotham who, when he talks about his stories, you know, one of Australia's gritty crime writers, that he doesn't know who did it. And he likes it that way because he feels if he doesn't know who did it until he gets to the end, then the reader won't know either.
Yeah. And he's brilliant how he does that, because he's a pantser as well from that point of view.
Yeah.
And it does. I mean, the only problem is obviously you've got a lot of ends that need to be tied up, and you need to make sure that it all works properly when you come back to do that second draft, the way that goes. But yeah, I think it's sort of quite nice when you work out who's done it.
So did you then have to go back and change a lot of things once you realised it wasn't person A, it was actually going to be person B?
Yeah, a few. Yeah. Not a lot, a few. And as it turned out, it was probably more fitting than it was this person. But yeah, it's the same as when you try and put them in danger because obviously you've always got to have them in danger at some point in time, but you know that they're going to get rescued because, hello, this is Cosy World.
Yeah.
Cosy World, other than the people that we need to die. And so, yeah, it was at that point where I thought, okay, who's actually coming in here now? Like, who is the person that's going to come in and do this final scene that I'd worked out what the scene was going to be. I just didn't know who it was that was going to be.
Right. Yeah, interesting. I love hearing about these processes because, you know, it is even for me, I'm a complete pantser. I do find it interesting that people who write in the genre of crime, whether it's really gritty or cozy or whatever in between, but when they don't know, like I find that, like, how could you write a crime and not know who did it? And I'm a pantser. Like I should understand it, but I don't. So
I think some people do, some people don't, and they're all right. You know, every person's process is the way their process is. But I think the biggest challenge that I had when I started writing cozies was that final conflict scene. You know, the one where we're putting them into some sort of danger, because I hadn't done that with my characters in the past. I hadn't. They may have been in some sort of emotional turmoil and had that sort of thing happen, but they hadn't been in physical danger, and I hadn't put them into any of those types of situations. And I actually ended up saying to my husband, who watches, he's never read a word that I've written, I will put that out there, but he watches a lot of those thrillers and action movies and that sort of thing. And I said to him, okay, I've got to write a fight scene. I need to write a fight scene. I need your help. And he's going, all right, give it to me. What have we got? I said, well, we're in Yorkshire, a little barn, little village, like Westow, tiny village. And we're in like a military dealership. He's going, okay, what guns have we got? I said, no, we've got no guns. We're in Yorkshire, in a little village, in time. Okay, can we have a car chase? No, we can't have a car chase. We're in a Yorkshire village in the middle of nowhere. We can't. Jason Statham wouldn't be putting up with this. Jason Statham's not in here. We've got a nearly 60-something lady in it. Okay, I'll do it myself.
Oh dear, I can't see Jason Statham in this kind of a setting.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Bev says that she likes it when she can't guess who did it until the end. It keeps her guessing, and Stacey agrees with Bev. It keeps her very interested there. Yeah, I always love to try to figure it out myself, and you know, if I do get it, I pat myself on the back, a little bit of pride.
Yeah, I do too.
Now, one of the other commonalities with cozies is that they do tend to be written in series. I'm not going to say always, because, you know, I haven't read every cozy that's out there, but the ones that I know of are all written in series. Why do you think a cozy lends itself to a series?
Mainly because I think again, it's that character, and it's the sidekick. So you've got your central character, and while you might have an overarching story, I guess, story for that particular person, you don't have to have everything resolved for them in the first go. And in fact, it's even better if you don't, if it grows as we go along. And in some cases, it doesn't even have to be a terribly meaty backstory for them, but it's just something that plods along in the background. And again, I'll use Midsummer Murders because I think, as I said to you when we were off air, I could seriously go on as Midsummer Murders, my special subject on Mastermind. Tom Love is on there. But you've got those overarching themes in there of Tom and Joyce's bad cooking and Troy's bad driving, and then the daughter and her little relationships. And so everything puddles along in the background. And a cozy lends itself to that sort of thing. You've got all these different characters that you can play with, but you don't have to resolve everything for them in this one book. You've got enough material that you can play with for them for multiple books or multiple areas using just the same people. I think it's perfect from that regard. Whereas for a women's fiction or a romance, which I also quite enjoy writing, you need to get that couple through their growth cycle so that they deserve their happy ending in the space of that book. No one's really interested in what happens after midnight. We've got them to that point, and that's where we are. Although obviously in a romantic series, you're going to have a romance for each of those side characters that will lead to another book. But again, we get them to midnight, we're not interested in going further. So it's just a slightly different genre, and I like getting to know them. It's like when you start to write it again, it's like getting to know some really good friends. You're going back out to the pub with them, you're having a pint with them, you're chatting up what's been happening. It's fun.
As we said in a series, One for Sorrow is the first of the Clementine Carter mysteries. Do you know how many there are going to be in this series? And is the next one called Two for Joy?
It could possibly be called Two for Joy. I don't know. At this stage, I've got ideas for about 5 or 6, but we could go further. So, yeah, I've got ideas for about 5 or 6 sitting there percolating in the back of my brain.
And any ETA for the second one?
Second Whale Bay will be early next year. The next Philly Barker will be the end of this year, so it will be probably October. So.
Alrighty, I'm just going to pop up the details of where you can find Jo online before we wrap this chat up. So if you have any last minute questions you want to ask Jo, pop them into the chat now. And if you are watching this back later, by all means, if you have questions for Jo, pop them into the comments section, and I can tag Jo so that she can see them, and over the weekend or into next week, that's fine. So please do ask the questions if they come to you later as well. So this is where we can find Jo online, and I've got 2 of the covers for the Philly Barker stories there as well, just to give you a little bit of a taster. Now, you did mention, I think you mentioned that you have also written romance. You've written women's fiction, romantic comedy. You've written a couple of different genres, Jo. So I wanted to ask you, does it help when you're writing your cozies that you have written romance before, or that you have written women's fiction? Are there things you can learn across those genres that help you write in them, or are they quite separate processes?
I haven't found them to be separate processes, to be honest. I find it more that it morphs into something else. So the cozies actually, so my women's fiction morphed out of my romantic comedy, and the cozies morphed out of women's fiction. So one of my women's fictions had a bit of a mystery element to it, as well as a lot of tea and scones, because that's the one thing I always write about is baking. And from that came the cozies. So yeah, with me, it's just sort of, it wasn't a decision. It wasn't a decision one way or the other. It was just what I felt like writing at that point in time. And I'm sort of not saying that I won't ever go back and write romance again, because I quite like it. And I write what I like to read and where I am at any point in time. And generally speaking, what I write is determined by what I want, not necessarily what I know, but what I want to know about. So it's where I want to go in my head, where I want to follow my curiosity to. So, I mean, that's all the decisions ever come from.
Excellent. Kate's just joined us now. Hi, Kate. Kate's down in Tassie, so it must be cold down there. We were talking about the weather at the beginning of the chat. Kate, she will watch the rest of it back later. Bev has said, excuse me, looking forward to reading your books, Jo. Another author to add to my growing list. Well, that's what I'm here for, Bev, is to add to your PBR pile. Exactly what I live for. So, and Yvonne as well. So that's nice. I mean, you know, I'm happy to do that. Take one for the team and let you all know about these books out there. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jo. And as I said, everyone, if you do have other questions you want to ask Jo, pop them into the chat at any point in time, and I can always let her know. And Kate is also adding to her to be read pile. You can never have too big a to be read pile, I say.
Absolutely not. And thanks very much for having me, Sandy. Nice seeing you all.
Nice. Thanks, guys.